My name is Robert Chen, and I spent 35 years as a forensic accountant before retiring to help small businesses navigate tax season. I've seen every financial scheme imaginable, from elaborate Ponzi structures to simple cash skimming operations. I thought I had developed an instinct for deception, a sixth sense that activated when numbers didn't align with reality. I was wrong. The man sitting across from me at Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago seemed like everything my daughter Sarah had been searching for. Marcus Webb was 42, well-dressed in a way that suggested success without arrogance. And he spoke about his investment consulting firm with the casual confidence of someone who had built something real. He asked intelligent questions about my work, remembered details from previous conversations, and treated Sarah with a tenderness that made my wife Linda squeeze my hand under the table. Sarah had been through enough disappointment. Her first marriage ended when she discovered her ex-husband gambling away their savings. She spent her 30s rebuilding, working 2 jobs while finishing her master's degree in education. When she met Marcus at a charity fundraiser, she called me the next morning with a lightness in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Marcus's business card listed him as a managing partner at Webb Capital Advisors. He explained that he helped high-net-worth individuals structure their portfolios for tax efficiency and long-term growth. It was vague enough to sound legitimate and specific enough to discourage follow-up questions. I didn't press because Sarah was happy, and happiness after hardship deserves respect. They married 14 months later in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. Marcus paid for everything, insisting that Sarah's parents had done enough already. The reception was elegant but modest, with perhaps 80 guests. I noticed that Marcus's side of the room was sparsely populated. When I asked about his family, he said his parents had passed, and he'd lost touch with extended relatives after moving frequently for work. Red flag number 1, though I didn't recognize it then. The newlyweds bought a townhouse in a development north of the city. Marcus handled the purchase entirely, explaining that his business connections had secured them favorable financing. Sarah signed the papers he brought home, trusting that her husband was protecting their interests. She was so accustomed to handling everything alone that having someone competent take charge felt like relief. Red flag number 2. I visited their home frequently during the first year. The townhouse was well furnished, but not ostentatious. Marcus kept his home office locked, which he explained was necessary because he handled sensitive client information. His desk faced away from the door, and I noticed he would minimize his computer screen whenever anyone entered, even Sarah. Red flag number 3, 4, and 5. But these observations were buried under the weight of Sarah's contentment. She was teaching full-time at a charter school she loved. She talked about starting a family. She seemed settled in a way that made my instincts feel like paranoia. Everything shifted on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Sarah had called that morning asking if I could help with their taxes. Marcus had been traveling frequently, and tax deadline was approaching. He'd left documents in his office, she said, and she felt uncomfortable going through his papers without permission. Could I come over while she was at work and organize everything so it would be ready when he returned? I arrived at 1 o'clock. Sarah had left a key under the planter by the front door. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. I carried my leather briefcase to Marcus's office, expecting the standard chaos of receipts and quarterly statements. The office was immaculate. Too immaculate. The desk held only a closed laptop, a wireless charger, and a framed photo of Sarah. The filing cabinet had 4 drawers, all locked. I found the key in the desk organizer, small and silver with a number stamped on the head. The first drawer contained household documents, mortgage papers, insurance policies, vehicle titles. Everything was labeled with color-coded tabs and filed chronologically. This was the work of someone who understood that organization creates plausible deniability. If everything visible is perfectly transparent, no one looks for what's hidden. The second drawer held tax returns going back 3 years. I pulled the most recent return and began scanning the figures. Marcus had filed jointly with Sarah. His reported income from Web Capital Advisors was $187,000. Respectable, consistent with the lifestyle I'd observed. Nothing alarming. The third drawer was labeled Client Files Confidential. I hesitated before opening it. This crossed a line from helping with taxes into active snooping. But something in my gut, that instinct I thought had failed me, whispered that the line had already been crossed long before I arrived. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with initials and dates. I opened one at random. Project Clearwater, MT, Q4, 2023. The folder contained wire transfer confirmations, LLC formation documents for an entity called Clearwater Holdings, and a single-page investor summary showing a $2.3 million position in Series A preferred equity. I pulled another folder, then another. Each contained similar structures: anonymous LLCs, wire transfers, private equity positions, special purpose vehicles. The amounts were staggering. I grabbed my phone and began photographing pages, my hands trembling slightly. Then I opened the fourth drawer. It held a single folder, thicker than the others, marked Personal Offshore Structure. Inside was a brokerage statement from a firm I didn't recognize, dated 6 weeks prior. The account was registered to MT Webb Family Trust. The portfolio balance was listed clearly at the top. $10,147,388.43. $10 million. I stared at the number until it stopped feeling like a number and became a question. Where did this come from? Why was it hidden? And most importantly, did Sarah know? I sat in Marcus's office chair, the statement trembling in my hands. $10 million. The number occupied physical space in the room, pressing against my chest like atmospheric pressure before a storm. I forced myself to breathe slowly and examine the document with the methodical attention I'd used during decades of forensic work. The brokerage firm was called Sentinel Trust and Custody, with an address in the Cayman Islands. That alone wasn't automatically suspicious. Plenty of legitimate investment vehicles used offshore structures for tax efficiency. But combined with the secrecy, the locked drawers, the separate entity name, it formed a pattern I'd seen too many times in fraud cases. I photographed the statement from multiple angles, making sure the account number, balance, and entity name were clearly visible. The holdings were listed below: a mix of private equity funds, pre-IPO technology company shares, and something called structured credit instruments. Class B. The allocation suggested someone with sophisticated investment knowledge or access to exclusive opportunities normally reserved for institutions. The dates mattered. The account had been opened 4 months before Marcus married Sarah. The largest deposits occurred during their engagement and in the 6 months following the wedding. I traced my finger down the transaction history, noting the pattern. Irregular deposits ranging from $200,000 to $1.2 million, always from entities with generic names like Crossbridge Capital Services or Pacific Rim Holdings, LLC. None of the deposit sources matched Web Capital Advisors. I pulled out my phone and called my former colleague, David Park. He'd transitioned from forensic accounting to wealth management compliance and had maintained contacts throughout the private banking world. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the perpetual optimism of someone who'd found happiness in retirement. "Robert Chen," he said warmly. "Please tell me you're calling because you're bored and want to consult on something interesting." "I need you to look up a firm," I said, skipping pleasantries. Quietly. Sentinel Trust in custody, Cayman Islands. Can you tell me what kind of shop they run? The warmth in David's voice cooled to professional curiosity. Give me 30 seconds. I heard keyboard clicks, then a low whistle. They're licensed and regulated, but they cater to a very specific clientele, high net worth individuals who need aggressive privacy structures. They don't ask many questions about source of funds as long as you can pass their minimum thresholds. Think Russian oligarchs, tech founders hiding assets from divorce proceedings, that tier. What's the minimum threshold? $5 million to open an account, $10 million to get their premier service level with the real anonymity features. My stomach dropped. What kind of anonymity features? Nominee directors, bearer shares if structured correctly, multi-jurisdictional trusts that obscure beneficial ownership. Legal, barely, but the kind of structure you use when you're hiding money from someone specific. Ex-spouse, business partner, government agency, or a wife. I thanked David and ended the call. My phone showed 2:47 p.m. Sarah would be home by 4:30. I had less than 2 hours to document everything and restore the office to its original state. I worked quickly, photographing every document in the offshore folder. There were quarterly statements going back 18 months, correspondence with Sentinel Trust regarding beneficial ownership verification, and a legal opinion letter from a law firm in Nassau confirming the structure's compliance with Cayman financial regulations. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the most recent statement that made my blood run cold. The note was on Marcus's personal stationery, dated 3 weeks earlier. It read, Transfer Protocol. Upon trigger event, liquidate 60% of portfolio and wire to Singapore account ending in 7734. Remainder to remain in trust structure for 24-month holding period. Confirm understanding. Below it, someone had written in different handwriting. Confirmed. Trigger event defined as previously agreed. Awaiting your authorization. This wasn't just hidden wealth. This was an escape plan. I photographed the note from multiple angles, then carefully returned everything to its exact position. I used my phone to take reference photos before disturbing anything, ensuring I could restore the drawer to its precise state. The color-coded tabs went back in order. The folders aligned with the drawer's edge exactly as I'd found them. I locked the filing cabinet and replaced the key in the desk organizer. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. I had time, but adrenaline was making my hands unsteady. I forced myself to slow down, to think like the forensic accountant I'd been rather than the terrified father I was becoming. The laptop sat on the desk, closed and password protected. I didn't attempt to access it. That would be a bridge too far, and I had enough evidence already. But I noticed a detail I'd missed earlier. A small external hard drive was connected to the laptop via a thin cable, barely visible behind the monitor. The drive was labeled Backup 2024 Q1. I photographed it without touching it. Then I heard the front door open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd been so focused on the documents that I'd failed to monitor the time. I glanced at my phone. 3:42 p.m. Sarah wasn't supposed to be home for another 45 minutes. Dad? Her voice called from the entryway. Are you still here? I stepped out of the office, pulling the door, closed behind me. Sarah stood in the hallway, still wearing her work clothes, a canvas bag of student papers slung over her shoulder. She looked exhausted. I got the documents organized, I said, keeping my voice steady. Everything's ready for Marcus to review when he gets back. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thank you. I know it's an imposition, asking you to go through his things. It's not an imposition, I said. That's what family does. The word family hung in the air between us. heavy with the weight of what I now knew and what I couldn't yet tell her. Because if I was right about what I'd discovered, Marcus Webb wasn't just hiding money. He was preparing to disappear. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Linda, staring at the ceiling while she breathed in the steady rhythm of someone unburdened by terrible knowledge. At 2 a.m., I gave up and went to my home office, spreading the photographs I'd taken across my desk like a detective building a murder board. The pieces didn't fit together into a single narrative yet, but they formed a constellation of wrongness. $10 million in an offshore account. Transfer protocols activated by undefined trigger events. An investment portfolio that generated no visible income on Marcus's tax returns. Client files that looked more like money laundering vehicles than legitimate consulting work. I needed more information before I could confront Sarah. If I went to her now with half-formed suspicions, Marcus would have time to explain it away, to reframe my discovery as paranoid misunderstanding. I'd seen it happen in dozens of fraud cases. The accused spouse weaponizes family loyalty, turning the victim against the whistleblower. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away. At 7 o'clock, I called Marcus's office number. A professional answering service picked up after 3 rings. Webb Capital Advisors. How may I direct your call? I'm trying to reach Marcus Webb regarding a consultation, I said. Is he available? Mr. Webb is traveling this week. May I take a message or connect you with his associate? Who is his associate? A pause. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not authorized to provide staff information. Would you like to leave a message in Mr. Webb's voicemail? I declined and hung up. I opened my laptop and searched for Webb Capital Advisors, with increasingly specific search terms. The company had a basic website with stock photos and vague language about wealth preservation strategies and portfolio optimization. No client testimonials, no case studies, no team photos or biography section. I ran a business entity search through the Secretary of State's database. Webb Capital Advisors, LLC was registered 2 years earlier, listing Marcus T. Webb as the sole managing member. The registered agent was a commercial mail forwarding service. The business address matched an executive suite facility that rented temporary office space by the month. This was a shell company masquerading as a legitimate business. I spent the next 3 hours building a timeline. I cross-referenced Marcus's tax returns with the offshore account statements, looking for money trails. The $187,000 in reported income from Webb Capital was just enough to justify their lifestyle and avoid raising red flags. But the real money, the $10 million sitting offshore, never appeared on any tax document. That meant one of 2 things. Either Marcus was committing tax fraud by failing to report foreign accounts, or the money wasn't legally his to begin with. At noon, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Dad?" she said, her voice tight with stress. "Can you come over tonight? Marcus wants to talk to you about the tax documents. He's coming home early from his trip." My stomach clenched. "Did you tell him I was in his office?" "Of course. You were helping with our taxes. Why wouldn't I tell him?" "Because now he knows someone has accessed his files. Because he's going to check whether anything was disturbed. Because I'm about to have a conversation with a man who might be running a sophisticated financial fraud, and he's going to be defensive and dangerous." "What time?" I asked. 7 o'clock. He's making dinner. He wants it to be casual, just family." Nothing about this was going to be casual. I arrived at Sarah's townhouse at exactly 7 o'clock. Marcus's Audi was parked in the driveway, still warm from the drive back from wherever he'd actually been. I tried calling David Park again that afternoon to ask about tracking private flights or travel patterns. But he'd warned me that without a subpoena or official investigation, That kind of surveillance crossed legal lines. Marcus answered the door in casual clothes, jeans and a button-down shirt, holding a glass of red wine. He smiled, but something about the geometry of it was wrong. The expression didn't engage his eyes. "Robert," he said warmly, extending his free hand. "Thank you for helping with the tax. Chaos. I'm terrible about staying organized." We shook hands. His grip was firm, calculated to convey confidence. I'd learned during my career that people who are truly confident don't think about their handshakes. They just shake hands. It's the deceivers who turn every gesture into a performance. "No problem," I said. "Sarah mentioned you were traveling." "Chicago. Client meeting that ran long." He gestured toward the living room. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying a salad bowl. She looked relieved that Marcus and I were being cordial. She'd grown up watching her parents navigate difficult conversations with grace, and she expected the same from the men in her life now. We sat at the dining room table. Marcus had prepared salmon with roasted vegetables, a meal that demonstrated competence without pretension. We made small talk about Sarah's school year, about Linda's volunteer work at the library, about the upcoming summer vacation plans. Then, Marcus set down his fork and looked at me directly. "I wanted to thank you personally for organizing my office," he said. "I know it can't have been comfortable going through my files. I tend to be private about client information, probably to a fault." "It's your profession," I said carefully. "Discretion is important when you're handling other people's money." "Exactly." He sipped his wine. "Which is why I need to ask. Did you open the fourth drawer in the filing cabinet?" The question hung in the air. Sarah stopped eating, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. She looked between us, sensing the shift in atmosphere. I met Marcus's gaze. This was the moment. I could lie, buy myself more time to gather evidence, or I could confront him directly and force the truth into the open. I chose confrontation. "Yes," I said. I opened all 4 drawers. Marcus's face remained perfectly still, but I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. He was running scenarios, weighing responses, deciding which version of the truth would serve him best. "Then you saw the offshore account statement," he said. It wasn't a question. Sarah's fork clattered against her plate. "What offshore account?" Marcus held up a hand, his attention still locked on me. "Before we have this conversation, I need to know. Did you photograph anything?" The directness surprised me. Most people in his position would deny, deflect, or attack. But Marcus was treating this like a negotiation, acknowledging the facts while trying to establish terms. "Yes," I said. "I documented everything." Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Someone tell me what's happening right now." Marcus turned to her, his expression shifting to something that resembled wounded sincerity. "Your father found some financial documents that are going to look suspicious without proper context. $10 million in a Cayman Islands trust," I said, cutting through his attempt to control the narrative. "Client files that look like shell company structures. Transfer protocols for moving money to Singapore. That's not looks suspicious, Marcus. That is suspicious." Sarah's face went pale. She looked at her husband, waiting for him to explain how this was all a misunderstanding, how there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. "It's my inheritance," Marcus said smoothly. "From a trust my father established before he died. It's structured offshore for tax efficiency, which is completely legal. I keep it separate from our finances because Sarah and I agreed to maintain some financial independence. We never agreed to you hiding $10 million, Sarah said, her voice shaking. We agreed to separate checking accounts for daily expenses. You told me we had maybe 70,000 in savings. The trust isn't liquid savings, Marcus countered. It's a long-term investment vehicle. I didn't tell you about it because I didn't want you to feel pressure about money. I wanted you to build your teaching career based on passion, not financial need. I'd heard this kind of rationalization before. The fraud reframed as protection, the deception presented as love. Show me your father's death certificate, I said. Show me the trust documents establishing you as beneficiary. Show me anything that proves this money came from a legitimate inheritance. Marcus's jaw tightened. I don't have to prove anything to you, Robert. This is my marriage, my finances. It's Sarah's marriage too, I said. And if there's nothing to hide, why are there transfer protocols? Why does your portfolio include structured credit instruments that are typically used for money laundering? Why do the deposit sources into that account come from entities that don't match your supposed consulting business? You don't know what you're talking about, Marcus said, his voice hardening. You spent your career chasing petty embezzlers and restaurant owners who skimmed cash. This is sophisticated wealth management, and you're too limited to understand the structures. Sarah slammed her hand on the table, making the wine glasses jump. Stop it. Both of you, stop it. She looked at Marcus, tears forming in her eyes. If it's just an inheritance, show me the documents. Show me the trust. I'm your wife. I should know about $10 million. Marcus stood up, pulling his phone from his pocket. Fine. I'll email you everything tomorrow. The documents are in a safety deposit box at my bank. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. Your father broke into my office, violated my privacy, and is now making accusations that could damage my reputation and my business. I didn't break in, I said. Sarah gave me a key. You went through locked drawers, Marcus shot back. You photographed confidential documents without permission. In some jurisdictions, that's a crime. And in every jurisdiction, tax evasion is a crime, I said. So is structuring financial transactions to evade reporting requirements. So is using shell companies to hide assets from a spouse during marriage. I'm not hiding assets, Marcus said, his voice rising. Everything I have is listed properly, disclosed appropriately, and managed by professionals who know far more about international tax law than a retired forensic accountant from the Midwest. Sarah walked to the window, her back to both of us. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. Marcus, I need you to leave tonight. He stared at her. What? Go to a hotel. Tomorrow, bring me every document related to that offshore account. Every trust agreement, every tax filing, every piece of evidence that proves this is what you say it is. She turned to face him. If you can do that, if you can prove this is legitimate, then we'll figure out why you kept it secret. But right now, I need space to think. Marcus's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally calculation. He was weighing whether pushing back would help or hurt his position. Okay, he said quietly. I'll get some things. He walked upstairs. I heard drawers opening, the sound of a suitcase being dragged from a closet. Sarah remained at the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Is it possible he's telling the truth? She asked without looking at me. Anything's possible, I said. But Sarah, I've seen hundreds of financial fraud cases. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the defensive anger when questioned. Those are patterns. And the note about trigger events, about liquidating and transferring money. That's not wealth management. That's an exit strategy. He wouldn't leave me, she whispered. We're trying to start a family. I walked over and put my hand on her shoulder. I hope I'm wrong. I hope tomorrow he shows up with a file folder full of legitimate trust documents. But either way, you did the right thing asking for space. Marcus came back downstairs carrying an overnight bag. He stopped in the doorway, looking at Sarah with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I love you," he said. "Tomorrow you'll see that everything's legal. And then we're going to have a serious conversation about boundaries with your family." He walked out without another word. The door closed with a hollow click that echoed through the suddenly empty house. Marcus didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. Sarah called him 17 times on Wednesday. Every call went straight to voicemail. She texted, asking for the documents he'd promised, for an explanation, for anything. The messages showed as delivered, but never read. By Thursday morning, she was panicking. I sat with her at her kitchen table, watching her hands shake as she held her phone, willing it to ring. "He's just angry," she said. "He'll cool off and come back." "Maybe," I said, though I knew better. I'd spent Wednesday doing research that made my worst suspicions look optimistic. Web Capital Advisors had 0 public reviews, no Better Business Bureau listing, no professional certifications registered with FINRA or the SEC. The executive suite address was a mail drop. The phone number went to an answering service that had no information about employees or office hours. Marcus's business was a facade. I'd also run his name through every database I had access to. Marcus Thomas Webb had no credit history before 5 years ago. No college transcripts, no employment records, no tax filings. It was as if he'd materialized fully formed in his early 40s, with a credit score and a consulting business. David Park had called me back Wednesday evening with information that made my stomach drop. "Your Sentinel Trust account." I called a contact at FinCEN. Hypothetically, an account that size with that ownership structure would trigger suspicious activity reports if there were irregular deposit patterns or source of funds issues. They wouldn't tell me if there's an active investigation, but the way my contact got very quiet and formal when I mentioned the firm name, that's not a good sign. On Friday morning, Sarah's phone finally rang. It wasn't Marcus. It was the property management company that handled their townhouse. "Mrs. Webb," the manager said in the clipped tone of someone delivering bad news. "We need to discuss the status of your lease." Sarah put the call on speaker. "What about our lease?" "The automatic payment for this month was declined. We attempted to process it twice. Both times insufficient funds." "That's not possible," Sarah said. "The account has automatic deposits from my paycheck and Marcus's business." "I'm just telling you what the bank told us. If we don't receive payment within 72 hours, we'll need to begin eviction proceedings." Sarah ended the call and immediately opened her banking app. I watched the blood drain from her face as she stared at the screen. "The joint account is empty," she whispered. $37. There was $12,000 in there last week. I took her phone and looked at the transaction history. On Tuesday night, after Marcus left, there had been an electronic transfer for $11,963 to an account at a bank I didn't recognize. The memo line read, "Transfer to savings." But when Sarah checked their supposed savings account at the same bank where they did their primary banking, it showed a balance of $83.42, unchanged for 3 months. The money was gone. "I need to call the bank," Sarah said, reaching for her phone with shaking hands. "Wait," I said. "Before you do that, I need to show you something." I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder of photographs I'd taken from Marcus's office. I'd been reluctant to show her everything, wanting to give Marcus a chance to explain. But that chance had evaporated when he disappeared and emptied their account. I showed her the offshore account statement. The $10 million, The quarterly reports showing deposits from entities that had no connection to Webb Capital Advisors. Then I showed her the client files. Each one followed the same pattern. An LLC formed in Delaware or Nevada, a wire transfer from an untraceable source. Funds moved through multiple accounts before landing in private equity investments or structured credit instruments. "This is money laundering architecture," I said, gently. "I don't know where the original money came from, but these structures are designed to obscure the source and make it look legitimate." Sarah stared at the screen, her face blank with shock. "He told me he consulted for wealthy clients. He said he helped them with tax planning." "He might have," I said. "But Sarah, people who do legitimate tax planning don't need Cayman Island trusts and Singapore transfer protocols. They don't create shell companies with nominee directors. This is what criminals do when they need to hide money from law enforcement." Her phone rang again. This time it was a number with a 202 area code. Washington, D.C. She answered hesitantly. "Hello? Is this Sarah Webb?" The voice was professional, female, official. "Yes." "This is Special Agent Jennifer Crawford with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I'm calling regarding your husband, Marcus Webb, and accounts held in your joint names. Are you able to speak privately?" I watched Sarah's world end, in slow motion. She looked at me with eyes that held the terrible understanding that everything she'd believed for the past 2 years had been built on lies. "I'm here with my father," she said. "He's a retired forensic accountant." "That might be helpful," Agent Crawford said. "Mrs. Webb, I need to inform you that your husband is currently under federal investigation for wire fraud, money laundering, and securities violations. We've been monitoring several accounts connected to him, including an offshore trust at Sentinel." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "Is he in custody?" "No, ma'am. We attempted to execute a warrant at your residence this morning, but Mr. Webb wasn't present. We believe he may have been tipped off about the investigation." "When was the last time you saw him?" "Tuesday night," Sarah said. "He left after an argument about finances." There was a pause. "Mrs. Webb, I'm going to need you to come to our field office downtown. We need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of your husband's business activities. And I need to inform you that some of the accounts under investigation include your name as a joint holder." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Am I in trouble?" she asked Agent Crawford. "That depends on what you knew and when you knew it." The federal building downtown looked like every government structure built in the 1970s. Concrete, glass, and an architectural commitment to intimidation. Sarah and I sat in Agent Crawford's office on the 8th floor, surrounded by whiteboards covered in diagrams that mapped out financial transactions like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except this wasn't theory. This was a federal case with evidence and witnesses and subpoenas. Agent Crawford was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back efficiently and the kind of direct eye contact that made evasion impossible. She sat across from us with a file folder that had Sarah's name on the tab. "Before we begin," Crawford said, "I need to clarify your legal position, Mrs. Webb. You have the right to have an attorney present. I'm not currently charging you with anything, but what you tell me today could potentially be used in court. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded numbly. I'd called a criminal defense attorney I knew, but he was on vacation and couldn't get back until Monday. We'd decided that Sarah should cooperate immediately, that any delay would look like obstruction. "I understand," Sarah said. "I want to help. I don't know what Marcus did, but I wasn't part of it." Crawford opened the folder. "Let's start with what you did know. When did you first learn about your husband's offshore accounts?" "Tuesday," Sarah said. My father found documents in Marcus's office. Before that, I had no idea. Did your husband ever discuss his investment strategies with you? No. He said his work was confidential, that he couldn't discuss client details. We kept separate finances mostly. I had my teacher's salary deposited into a joint account for household expenses. He handled everything else. Crawford made notes. Did you ever sign documents related to foreign accounts? Perhaps papers he brought home and asked you to sign without reading? Sarah thought carefully. When we bought the townhouse, there were dozens of papers. I signed everything he gave me. But they were supposed to be mortgage documents, closing papers. Do you remember anything about trusts or offshore entities? No, nothing like that. Crawford pulled out a document and slid it across the desk. This is a signature card for an account at Sentinel Trust and Custody. The account is registered to something called the Webb Family Irrevocable Trust. Do you recognize this signature? Sarah looked at the paper, and her face went white. That's my signature. But I never saw this document. I didn't sign this. It's possible you signed a blank form, Crawford said. Or that your husband traced your signature from another document. We see that frequently in these cases. These cases? I asked. What exactly is Marcus accused of? Crawford leaned back in her chair. Marcus Webb, if that's even his real name, has been running a sophisticated investment fraud scheme for at least 3 years. He solicited money from investors, promising exclusive access to pre-IPO technology companies and private equity deals. He showed them fabricated account statements and forged letters from venture capital firms. The money never went to legitimate investments. Where did it go? Sarah asked. Offshore accounts, shell companies, and apparently luxury purchases. The Audi he drives? Leased under an LLC funded by investor money. The townhouse? Down payment came from a wire transfer that traces back to a victim in California who thought he was investing in a SpaceX funding round. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. How much did he steal? We've identified approximately $12 million in confirmed losses. There may be more, victims who haven't come forward yet. The number hung in the air. $12 million? More than the offshore account balance I'd seen. Which meant Marcus had already spent or moved a significant portion. What happens now? I asked. Crawford looked at Sarah with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Webb, I believe you when you say you didn't know. But you're going to need to prove it. Your name is on some of these accounts. You signed documents, even if you didn't know what they were. A prosecutor might argue that you benefited from the fraud through the lifestyle you maintained. I work as a teacher, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I make $47,000 a year. I didn't benefit from anything. I didn't know. The townhouse is in your name, Crawford said. Joint ownership with your husband. That's an asset that could be seized as proceeds of fraud. We're renting, Sarah said. We don't own it. Crawford frowned. The property records show Marcus and Sarah Webb as owners, with a mortgage from Coastal Trust Bank. Sarah looked at me in confusion. We rent? We pay $1,500 a month to a property management company. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Agent Crawford, can you pull up the property records? She turned her monitor so we could see. The county assessor's website showed the townhouse address. Owners, Marcus Thomas Webb and Sarah Lynn Webb. Purchase price, $485,000. Mortgage, $388,000. Purchase date, 14 months ago, 1 month before they'd moved in. He bought it, I said. He told Sarah they were renting, collected $1,500 a month from her for rent, and pocketed it while paying the actual mortgage with stolen money. Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He scammed me while scamming everyone else. It gets worse. Crawford said quietly. She pulled out another document. 3 weeks ago, Marcus took out a home equity line of credit against the townhouse for $200,000. He maxed it out immediately and transferred the money offshore. When the bank tries to collect and can't find him, they're going to foreclose. And since you're a co-owner, that foreclosure will destroy your credit. But I didn't sign for a home equity line, Sarah protested. Crawford showed her the signature on the loan documents. It was Sarah's signature, or close enough that a notary had certified it. Did you ever lose your driver's license? Crawford asked. Or have your ID stolen? Sarah thought back. Last year, my purse was stolen from my car at school. I had to get everything replaced. He probably kept your old license, I said. Used it to notarize forged documents. Sarah stood up abruptly, walked to the window. 8 floors below, the city continued its normal rhythm. People going to work, buying coffee, living ordinary lives where their husbands didn't steal identities and defraud investors. I'm going to lose everything, she said. The house, my credit, my reputation. Not if we move fast, Crawford said. She opened another folder. I'm prepared to offer you full cooperation immunity. You testify about what you knew and when you knew it. You help us locate Marcus. You turn over any documents or evidence you have access to. In exchange, the U.S. attorney won't pursue charges against you. What about the house? Sarah asked. The house is proceeds of fraud. It will be seized and sold. Any equity will go to victim restitution. Crawford's voice softened. I know this is devastating, Mrs. Webb. But the alternative is potential conspiracy charges and years in federal prison. Sarah looked at me. I nodded. I'll cooperate, she said. I'll do whatever you need. Crawford slid a document across the desk. Sign here. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Marcus Thomas Webb face justice. He'd been arrested at the Singapore airport trying to board a flight to Jakarta using a passport under a different name. Extradition took 6 weeks. During that time, Sarah had lost the townhouse, maxed out credit cards Marcus had opened in her name, and moved into my spare bedroom. The man in the defendant's chair looked different from the confident son-in-law I'd met at Thanksgiving. He'd lost weight in custody. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by a standard-issue blazer provided by his public defender. The charm had evaporated, leaving behind someone who looked exactly like what he was, a criminal who'd run out of exits. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Torres stood at the prosecution table, organized and methodical. Your Honor, the government is prepared to proceed with sentencing recommendations. Judge Patricia Hernandez looked down from the bench with the weary expression of someone who'd presided over too many fraud cases. I've reviewed the pre-sentence report and the victim impact statements. Mr. Torres, summarize the government's position. Your Honor, Marcus Webb operated a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that defrauded 14 victims of approximately $12.4 million. He created false documents, forged identities, and used his own wife as an unwitting participant. The offshore accounts contained $8.7 million when frozen by FinCEN. The remaining funds were spent on luxury items and casino gambling. Casino gambling. That detail had emerged during the investigation. Marcus had lost nearly $2 million at high-stakes poker tables in Macau, funded entirely by investor money. The government recommends 168 months in federal prison, Torres continued, followed by supervised release and full restitution to victims. 14 years. Judge Hernandez turned to the defense table. Does the defendant wish to make a statement? Marcus's attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Richard Klein, stood. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court. Marcus stood up. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man who charmed his way into my daughter's life. He looked directly at the judge, his voice steady. Your Honor, I take full responsibility for my actions. I make no excuses. I betrayed people who trusted me, including my wife, who had no knowledge of what I was doing. He paused, as if the weight of confession was physically difficult. I told myself I was going to make it right, that the investments would pay off and everyone would get their money back. But that was just another lie I told myself. He glanced back at Sarah, who sat in the gallery next to me. I'm sorry isn't enough. I destroyed your life. You deserved better than what I gave you. Sarah's face remained impassive. She'd cried herself empty weeks ago. Judge Hernandez studied Marcus for a long moment. Mr. Webb, I've presided over financial fraud cases for 23 years. I've heard every rationalization, every excuse, every promise to make amends. What strikes me about your case isn't the amount you stole, though $12.4 million is certainly significant. It's the calculated cruelty of how you did it. She picked up a document from her bench. You married Sarah Webb, knowing you were under investigation. You bought a house in her name, knowing it would implicate her when you disappeared. You forged her signature on loan documents that would destroy her credit. You didn't just steal from investors, Mr. Webb. You weaponized your own wife. Marcus said nothing. The sentencing guidelines recommend 140 to 175 months. Judge Hernandez continued. I'm sentencing you to the maximum, 175 months in federal custody, followed by 5 years supervised release. You will pay full restitution to your victims, including the equity seized from the marital residence. The gavel came down with a sound that echoed in the quiet courtroom. Marcus was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, Sarah and I stood in the autumn sunlight. The trees were turning gold and red, oblivious to human drama. 14 years, Sarah said. He'll be 60 when he gets out. He'll likely serve less with good behavior, I said. Maybe 10 or 11 years. She nodded distantly. I keep thinking about the woman he'll become involved with when he's released. She won't know what he is. He'll charm her the same way he charmed me. Maybe, I said. Or maybe prison will change him. Sarah laughed, a bitter sound. You don't believe that. I didn't. We walked to my car. Sarah had sold her vehicle to pay legal fees. She'd filed for divorce while Marcus was in custody, but the process was complicated by asset seizures and victim restitution claims. The mortgage company had foreclosed on the townhouse. Her credit score had dropped to 510 due to accounts Marcus had opened in her name. She was 38 years old and starting over from less than zero. Agent Crawford called yesterday, Sarah said as we drove back to my house. They recovered $8.7 million from the offshore accounts. After legal fees and government costs, they estimate victims will get back about 60 cents on the dollar. That's better than most fraud cases, I said. The rest is gone. Marcus gambled it away in Macau, spent it on cars and watches and hotel suites. He lived like a movie villain. She stared out the window. I shared a bed with him for 2 years. How did I not know? It was a question she'd asked in various forms every day since the arrest. There was no good answer. He was good at lying, I said. That's not a reflection on you. I should have questioned things. The secretiveness about money, the locked office, the separate accounts, those were red flags. Hindsight makes everyone an expert, I said. You trusted your husband. That's not a character flaw. We rode in silence for several blocks. Finally, Sarah spoke again. I got a job offer. Teaching position in Oregon. Small town, good school district. They don't care about credit scores. My chest tightened. When would you leave? 2 weeks, Fresh start, new state, no one knows about Marcus or the trial or any of it. I understood the impulse. Illinois held nothing but painful memories now. What about us? I asked. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Dad, you saved my life. If you hadn't found those documents, hadn't pushed for answers, I'd be sitting in a prison cell next to Marcus right now. But I need distance. I need to rebuild somewhere the neighbors don't whisper when I walk past. I understand, I said, and I did. 2 weeks later, I helped Sarah load her remaining possessions into a rental truck. Everything she owned fit in a 10-foot container. Her books, her clothes, a few pieces of furniture she'd kept from before the marriage. At the Oregon border, she called me from a rest stop. I made it, she said. 6 more hours to the new place. Drive safe, I said. Call when you get there. Dad? Yeah? Thank you for not letting me ignore the truth. I hated you for it at the time. But you were right. I listened to the silence on the line, the space between us measured in miles, and hurt. Love you, Sarah. Love you too. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the house too quiet now that she was gone. On my desk sat the file folder I'd kept from Marcus's office. I'd turned over copies to the FBI but kept the originals as a reminder. The offshore account statement, the 10,47 house 388.43 that had started everything. I thought about the 14 victims who'd lost their savings, their retirements, their faith in other people. I thought about Sarah, starting over in a town where no one knew her story. I thought about Marcus in a federal facility somewhere, sitting in a cell that cost taxpayers $35,000 a year. The money had been recovered. Justice had been served. The consequences were devastating, but Sarah was alive, free, and rebuilding. In the end, that had to be enough. Epilogue. 5 years later, Sarah called on a Sunday morning. I was in my workshop restoring a 1967 Mustang when my phone rang. Dad, she said, her voice lighter than I'd heard in years. I wanted you to know first. I'm getting married. My hand tightened on the wrench. To who? His name is David. He's a high school guidance counselor. We've been dating for 2 years. She paused. I ran a background check on him. Credit report, criminal history, the whole thing. He laughed when I told him, said it showed I was smart. When's the wedding? Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Will you walk me down the aisle? I looked out the workshop window at the autumn trees, golden in the afternoon light. Of course, I said. And Dad? His finances are an open book. Joint accounts from day one, no secrets. That's good, Sarah. That's how it should be. After we hung up, I went back to the Mustang. The engine needed rebuilding, patient work that required attention to small details. One careful step at a time. The way we rebuild everything after devastation. The way Sarah had rebuilt her life.